All right, let's do it. Chuck Shelton, how's it going, my friend?
Hello, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and I guess I think I spoke too quickly on that.
Mm.
I think we just shared offline here. I'm feeling a bit of spatial disorientation,
Yep.
considering the election and everything that's been happening, and I'm a little all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the where are we, and then that leads me to the who are we. And it kind of pushes me to kind of revisit what do I really believe? How do I really want to show up? And the times like we're in right now, I was thinking there's never been a better time to be an inclusive leader than right now. Whatever role you're in your work or whatever role you have in your personal life.
Yeah, surely. And Chuck, speaking of who are we, why don't you share a little bit about just who you are, what you do, and more specifically, how long you've been doing it?
Yeah. Thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah.
So honored to do this with you. Thanks for asking. Appreciate being included. I grew up in Seattle, so I'm a Northwest person. Grew up in the 60s in a church family, and that meant for us there was a lot that we were paying attention to what was going on in the world. There was lots going on in the 60s. When Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, my parents took me to a racial reconciliation workshop at a Methodist church in Seattle. And Reverend Woody White, who was the presenter, an African-American pastor, now a retired bishop in Atlanta, he looked at me and he said, I need you to take responsibility for being white. So you become part of the solution and not part of my problem. I was 13. Any boy 13 years old is not known for epiphanies, but it became a calling, in my life. It was an invitation, as it turned out in the intervening 50 plus years, to take responsibility for the cultures that I'm from, by sexual orientation, race, gender, language, religion, etc. I'm from pretty much every culture of advantage possible. And what that's meant for me is a career that's been at the intersection of like leadership development and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm Great Heart Consulting, which is the company I founded, and we're growing, has really focused on how do leaders become more inclusive to remove bias and generate opportunity. And along the way, the learning for me personally and professionally has been about building bridges with people who come from other communities and identities. And how do I do that in a way that both builds bridges across differences where we struggle, and increasingly in the last 20 years, how do I become a source for people from communities that I'm from? So if in the bridge building metaphor, how do you and I build bridges together from communities that we have shaped us and that we represent to some degree? And how do we bring people to those bridges and have them build their own bridges? For me, a week of in an election week, to see almost 70 million people vote for someone who's clearly committed himself to white supremacy. I'm thinking not everybody in the community of white people in the United States is going to be interested in bridges I'm building. And given what's happened since George Floyd was murdered in June, I've been hoping and waiting and looking forward for many years to the point where people who identify as white men and women in America would start engaging in real racial learning, real reckoning, real relationships, and the way that must show up in the way that we work and live. So I'm so discouraged and encouraged at the same time. I don't even know how to feel right now, because there's lots of great stuff going on that's different than anything I've ever seen before in my entire life. And there's old, ancient, horrible stuff that's got permission and is manifesting in ways that I honestly would have been just fine not ever seeing again, and wasn't and didn't really expect to see. And here we are.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk about just the mixed emotion about there's opportunity and yet there's struggle, all playing out the same time. I remember even the first time that I got a chance to experience Great Heart Consulting, and I got to experience you, Chuck. And I remember, and I loved your answer. This is why I wanted to invite you in. You passed the smell test. I don't know if you remember, but I remember asking you the question. I said, are you more like Vanilla Ice or is this Eminem? And then you responded, says, no, I'm more like the guy on the drums in the back. And I was like, that's a good answer, Chuck. That's a good answer. And And I imagine, you probably get a lot of kind of side eye looks, right? In being a white man in racial equity work, or specifically diversity, equity, inclusion work and leadership development. But I think it also goes back to, like you said, that calling you had, probably some trials and tribulations that you've had over the years, your commitment to this before it became popular. As one of my friends said, finally in 2020, white people figured out that racism is a thing. And so, you've been doing this for a very long time. And I'm curious, just with the history of what you've seen, how have you been processing 2020?
Well, I always come at it from a leadership perspective, and I think what we've seen, and I by inclusive leadership, what I mean us having an inclusive mindset and being able to work effectively with difference from any role. So it's not just a people manager kind of a role. And honestly, we lead in our own lives. We lead in our own relationships. So inclusive leadership is inclusive in the way where I'm thinking about it. What's happened this year so far, and we still have, God help us, 2 more months to go. There's not in anybody's business plan. There's not in any curriculum in any school anyone's ever gone to. COVID alone has been, just devastating, isolating, pushing us in directions kind of away from each other at just a super personal level. We've somehow become like life-threatening risks to one another, and everyone else is to us. I mean, what the heck? Yeah. Who's up for that? So you add in, the impact on economies and people's jobs and people's health and people losing, I talked to somebody recently who lost 8 members, the 8 oldest members of their family to COVID, and they couldn't be with any of them. I mean, it's just completely heartbreaking and disturbing. So, you add in the reckoning that is coming from late May. I don't know if you can make sense of it. I guess what I'm finding myself acknowledging is that when the pronouncements, all the organizations did public statements, sent money to Black Lives Matter. Some of them took Juneteenth off when they had never heard of Juneteenth before. I'm not going to go the cynical place and say people are just, it's all rhetoric. They just want to be seen to be on the right side of history, but they don't really have any idea what that's going to require. I think we now can see 6 months later how that's working out. And there are plenty of organizations that did want the optics of doing something visibly momentous, but didn't really understand what the heck they were talking about. And I'm at the point now where I'm talking with chief diversity officers in companies that are often people of color and often Black people. And I'll say, so a year from now, 5 years from now, when you continue to encounter and are in relationship with dozens or hundreds of white leaders, men and women, who are and have been taking race seriously and doing their own learning, and both doing the listening and learning and the amplifying of Black and brown voices, and starting to have their own voice. What's that going to be like for you? How are you going to lead on diversity and inclusion when you have like uncountable numbers of white people who are actually seriously getting after it? And I'd be interested in your response, Lawrence. Every one of them have said to me so far, like, I don't know. I've never experienced that. Well, I have no idea. And it's I kind of look with a tone of voice of like, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. But I hear in your question, that I might want to be thinking about it. So I because I've been doing this work for so long, I'm absolutely always kind of thinking ahead. Yeah. And I think the next 5 years are probably going to continue to have this crazy mix of white supremacy laid bare. Mm-hmm. And a millennial generation and a Generation Z coming of age and moving from like, what's wrong with you all you old people, to realizing a lot of what we're still trying to solve for and recover from, they're still going to get to do, mm-hmm. but it won't be the same. Mm-hmm. So I don't know exactly how it's going to be different, but in organizational life where we tend to do a lot of our work at Great Heart, I was in a meeting last week with an executive team of a mid-sized company, And 90 minutes at the end of the session, it was kind of like the 10 minutes where you say anything anybody wants to say
Sure.
they've been thinking about and haven't said yet.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who'd been quietest through the whole time, he like, and it's all on camera, so it's like a little weird, but it's the best we can do right now. And all of a sudden he blurts out, I haven't been able to think about anything else that's happened in the last 90 minutes, because when you told your story and you said the phrase, take responsibility for being white, I realized that's all and everything I've been feeling. And he was a white guy, right? It's everything I've been feeling since George Floyd was killed. Mm. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I've never had a white male executive say that to me in 50 plus years of doing this work.
Wow.
And it just came out of him, and it was real and it was powerful. And I'm going, okay, I'm not in charge of what's going on around here. I get to be part of it. Yeah. And I'm going to do everything I can to just come alongside that guy and like torment him with love. I'm just going to I hear you. It's time to be urgent, man. You got to get off your butt and get going here.
Yeah.
And patience, yes. Safety, yes. I'm all for all those things. Yeah. But we don't have time to be comfortable anymore.
Right.
And I'm seeing white people going, I get this. I gotta wade in. I don't know what it means.
Well, I want to answer your question too, Chuck, and thank you for sharing and inviting me into this conversation in regards to what would it look like when you've got white people really going after it, right? And I think that laughter that we have inside, like, oh, yeah, okay,
yeah,
you
silly man,
right? And it reminds me of a couple of things. One, it reminds me historically, Black people have been on defense, right? We don't get to be on offense, right? So oftentimes we're kind of in protective mode, and we're really trying to fight things off versus trying to take territory or trying to take the field, if you will. And so I think that's one kind of hurdle, right? And that's one kind of shift that we need to make, and that's to be on offense. I think the other piece is that it's the trust piece, right? And it's like deep, meaningful relationships that are really rooted in trust, that we could really go somewhere together, because we're trying to become an America we've never been, right? We've never been what we are talking about here, right? So it's this aspect of do I, because hope has a cost, and so does hopelessness, right? So Absolutely. It's like each of these have a cost, and then it's like, okay, so do I sit in the position of being the realist or the idealist, right? And sometimes I don't have the luxury, right, to be the idealist, but I want to be. I really want to live and move and operate in that space of what it could be, right? And so I think that's where the chuckle comes in. But what I will say is, and this actually came from my grandparents' generation of conversations that I've had as of late. They said, I've never seen this many white people be this angry about racism. They said, I've never seen it like this before. And so that's what gives me hope, is to say that the number of white people who are participating now in the front lines, right, for racial equity and for racial justice work has never been the way that it's been, since really essentially since May. So that's what gives me hope.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, that's such an interesting, like, offense and defense, and like the price you pay for being, if I'm hearing you right, is like the price, or the prices you pay for being on defense is like, when somebody hands you the ball, you go, what am I supposed to do with this? Right. Because my job is to take the ball away from you.
Right.
And I remember when I was watching the Black Panther movie, and I remember the scene where they fly in over that African city. Mm-hmm. That's just like a city you've never seen before. It's like a city that African people built and envisioned, and it looks African and it looks modern. And it's like a city we've never seen. And I remember, I still feel like we remember our feelings. I remember feeling, on the one hand, that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen, because it's like not out there somewhere. It's like here. It looked like a human city. Yeah. And I also felt this grief. It's just like, how is it that history has arranged itself, and particularly people like me have arranged it to prevent us from having that city? Yeah. I mean, it's just like, and that it's like I had this like super like contradictory feeling. It was magnificent. It's like, oh, I want to see that city. I want to go to that city. And then knowing that we don't have that city yet.
Right.
And to your point, we don't know how to do what we're headed into. We've not ever done it before. Are there new things under the sun? Well, apparently,
Right.
because
Right.
like nobody knows how to do this. And the learning arc for all of us, I mean, I feel the personal responsibility aside for me, I feel it for people who are from cultures that I'm from. And I feel it in building relationships with people like you who come at it with your own version of the same thing.
Yeah.
And I do think that's the answer. I think that when we're doing this with our friends, our colleagues, our families, and we're doing the Thanksgiving dinner, if we get to go to Thanksgiving dinner this year, we're doing it for real in our hiring and advancement decisions. We're doing it by the way we vote. We're, I mean, that's how we take the ground. And I spent my whole life cajoling white people to get to the place that now apparently many of us have arrived. I don't take any credit for it because I was clearly pretty much a unicorn for a lot of that time. And at this point, I too, in my own way, don't quite know what to do except for to keep doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And now there's just more people. There's more people to do it with. And that's pretty interesting.
And, the visual that I have is, there's a tool in one hand to build, and then there's a weapon in the other hand to fight. Right. And so this is what that experience is, and so sometimes we'll have to pivot from one to the other. And hopefully we can do it wisely. And so let me go to the next question here. And I'm really curious about this, Chuck. Why do white men tend to be absent from the conversations about equity?
One of the features of being in any majority, and this isn't just a white guy thing, this would be, pick your culture and your, if you're a Seahawks fan and you're like from San Francisco, I mean, there's all kinds of challenges, right?
I'm a Seahawk. I said I'm a Seahawk. Don't laugh. I know people are laughing. They're like, I knew he was going to say that. I'm a Niner. I'm a Niner. And
that's awesome. My son-in-law is too. He somehow got in the family without me finding out. It's like, no, I'm all good. I'm good. I like the Niners too. But anyway, when it comes to a majority culture, one of the prices you pay for being often in a majority is that you haven't developed a point of view around it. It's like, does the fish know it's wet, right?
That's good.
So when it comes to equity, and there's socioeconomic factors, so I don't want to say that all white men are the same, and it's not like anybody has deputized me to speak for all of us, but in general, many of us as white men have looked in the mirror, growing up, looked in the mirror and seen our names. We haven't had to calibrate our sense of ourselves in the world by our gender or our race. And that is such a foreign idea to anyone who's had to calibrate who they were vis-a-vis the majority their entire life, that it's hard to communicate. But it's like the architecture of advantage. It's like not having to know things. And so we don't show up because, one, we've spent even since the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, we spent the last 5 decades externalizing this and saying diversity inclusion is about them. And now the demographics, the generational, the impact of technology, the globalization, there's a dozen trends underlying this push, our own sons, there's this push to say, the fact that you're white and the fact that you identify as a man actually is kind of relevant to how I see you, how I respond to you. You might want to take it into consideration, just food for thought. Yeah. And for many of us, who only viewed that as a risk or a threat, God knows the risk around engaging in racial conversations is so well organized. I hear people who are like fantastically high functioning. They run businesses of billions of dollars, and they're saying things like, well, I don't know, is it Black or African American? I don't know what to say. And I can't figure out, should I hit them in the head? Should I hit myself in the head? I mean, it's so ridiculous. You have such an advanced skill set. You're like an advanced human being in every respect. And your deflection and your lack of engagement has got you saying that. But it's like the price that we pay for not being engaged.
Yeah.
It's true for us as men when it comes to gender, right? So
Right.
we're not in it because we have, and there's still people who say, I mean, one of the challenges I face in work with white folks is African Americans in particular, who say whiteness is essentially evil and broken, and it cannot be redeemed. So good luck, Chuck, but it ain't going to happen, because to be white is essentially to be broken. And
Mhm.
that's a tough place that I have a hard time building a bridge, right, to that part of it. That's actually more a conversation I need you to be having with people who are in that place, right? And
Yeah.
maybe you'll find that they don't want to talk to you either. I don't know. But in general, we've self-marginalized.
Mhm.
We've accepted we're paying the price for our complicity and collusion,
Mhm.
and we haven't known it until now. So where we enter often these conversations, just bewildered. It's like, well, what do you mean? That's not how I see myself. How could you think about me that way? And we did a study in 2012 with white men leading through diversity and inclusion. And the essence of the research was, how do we as white men see ourselves leading on a bunch of behaviors of leadership? And how do people who don't identify as white men see us? And like, not real shocking, there are places where, diverse includes diverse voices in decision making. 76% of these white male managers across, 8 big companies said, oh yeah, I'm really good at that. 19% of people who weren't white guys go, white guys are really good at that. So, our self-perception needs some attention. And the good news is, when we go from not being involved and not involving ourselves to saying, I need to learn and listen, and I can bring some humility to this,
Yeah.
then my experience as a white person is that it's like, okay, don't do that again, but I see where you're going, keep going.
Yeah.
And if I do, then trust gets built. So it's not rocket science for any of us who haven't been in the game to get in the game.
Yeah. Thank you, Chuck. And I noticed that we are sharing thoughts and ideas and just kind of our experiences, and there's a little bit of laughter to it and so forth. But I also want to kind of take a step back and say, I know for some folks that are going to be watching and listening to this, I I, I understand the sensitivity behind it as well. I understand that uh, some people aren't being meaningfully ignorant, right? Or
Right.
and so I want to be thoughtful about, and I don't know if it should, and this is live uncut, like
Right.
should I be apologizing for laughing, I guess, is to right now, Chuck.
I mean, I really appreciate the sensitivity to tone, Lawrence. I'm This is probably a personality thing, but for one of the questions I get now is like, how is it that you're still doing this? How have you hung in there to keep doing this? And to me, being as real as we can be about our own stuff and with each other, and recognizing just how deadly serious it is, it is balanced with the things that seem unexplainable or funny. Or, I mean, I've said for many years around gender, if we can't find some of the humor in gender differences, then we're really missing out, because there's a lot of really funny stuff across difference, and we can do the wrong thing with that. And to be human together means we also recognize our own absurdity. I mean, so I don't think that, for me, and I appreciate the call out, our laughter, what I want it to be is, and perceived as, is a reflection of us learning how to be real with ourselves and with one another, because some of it deserves laughter,
Yeah.
and a healthy laughter.
Yeah.
And some of it's so deadly serious that laughter kind of goes into the woodwork, because some of the stuff we're talking about, there is nothing funny about it. It's completely deadly serious.
Yeah. And I also want to throw out the disclaimer. I mess up all the time, Chuck. Like, I'm fumbling and bumbling through stuff. And so I think you could probably speak to that as well. And for our viewers and listeners here, we're still figuring it out. And I don't
Oh
even
my
know what
God.
figuring it out means, right? I mean, we just know that we continue to have a learner's posture in this work. and recognizing that there is no end game, because cultures continually evolve over time, and it's our responsibility to adjust as such, if we want to be, what I would say, a contributor to humanity, right, in the positive sense. So I wanted to throw that out there, and let me kind of move on to this next one here. And this is actually kind of fitting. The next question, from your experience, Chuck, like, what do you see, what works and what doesn't work when we're talking about reaching white men to join the conversation with equity? And I want to be specific about equity in this one too, because not just in race, but in gender and ability and language and culture, like all of it, right? So talk to me about that.
Yeah, thanks. I think what works, partly is what we were just talking about. What works is us being human with each other and being real. There's so much, my view of the kind of the defense mechanism around all that's just political correctness. And maybe it kind of ideological deflection, saying, oh, that's a left-wing conspiracy. And if you want to go there and hold on to that spot, to me, that's just an identifier of you not being an early adopter, and hopefully you'll come around. The more positive what works, in that regard is people feeling our respect for one another, and not assuming or judging someone on the basis of even who they voted for, which is hard right now. Because those feelings and accusations are flying, and the arguments between us are always so well written and rehearsed, and are in the news cycle and in us, all the time. So to me, what works is about being real, and part of that, and I would say the bottom line for how we do our work at Great Heart is it's about it's about having clear definitions of what our words mean, like equity. And the difference between equity and equality, and how diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatever order you're defining them in, how they go together. So I think definitional work is pretty clear. And that doesn't necessarily mean going out and finding out somebody else's definition, because my experience with keywords like trust and respect and equity is that we need to internalize what that means to us. And I don't feel the pressure to have to. I think there's some concepts in the idea of equity around fairness and recognizing differences in the way that we think about access to opportunity, for example, that is embedded in the idea of equity. My own experience with it has to be lived. So, like, for example, right now we're in a process to socialize diversity and inclusion as a source for improving leadership with 2,200 white leaders in a company, white male leaders. So this question is perfectly on point for that, because what works and what doesn't work. This company's pretty darn nervous about having this conversation, because they've done diversity inclusion work for years, and they've always said it's about everybody. But this is the first point at which they've actually said, then we're going to actually directly engage the white guys as white guys. And it's certainly weird for us, because in the kind of normative frame of a lot of organizations, being a white guy, being in a meeting because you're a white guy, it's like the first time we ever did that. We're in plenty of meetings where they're like just us or almost just us, but we aren't there as white guys. Right. We're just there as us, right? That's the normative part.
Individuals.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfectly, yes. Self-actualized, right?
Right.
So what works is being really clear about our own self-interest. What works is being clear about our definitions, so that we can, and not clear in the sense that we aren't teachable, but for me, the idea of equity and the way equity is being added to the construct of diversity inclusion, it gets at that idea of fairness at its heart. One thing it gets at is that, and that opens up. It requires a degree of a commitment to complexity, because equity and equality aren't the same thing. Right. We don't treat everybody the same way because everybody isn't the same. Right. And how do we treat everybody fairly? It's like, well, fairly and equally, isn't that the same thing? No, it's not. Right. And every time I say it, I think, well, yeah, wait a minute, because like at one level, the common wisdom is that it is, but building a point of view is what works. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. What doesn't work in terms of engaging white men, one thing I'm seeing right now in particular, we all need to be caring and conscious as we can. Mm-hmm. And right now, when I'll hear a white guy say, well, must be a great time to be a woman because they're getting all the jobs in tech. There's no data that shows that women are getting all the jobs in tech. In fact, the data is pretty much clearly the other way. Even in companies like PricewaterhouseCoopers that have been like seriously at transformation that was more equitable, over a 3-year shift, the data they just released shows that the most change over 3 intentional years was 2%, right? 2%. So this is not exactly like women are taking our jobs. This is not that, right?
Right.
And right now, what doesn't work, and unfortunately it's happening quite a bit, is when a white guy says, from not having as a deeply developed point of view, just kind of getting in the game, says something like, must be a great time for a woman to get a job, to be a woman because they're getting all the tech jobs. So often what comes back at us is, are you freaking kidding me? Have you seen the data? And up the PowerPoint goes. And our reaction to that is to argue with the source of the data or the methodology. What we aren't getting to is what we should be saying, and it should be said back, is, so that's an interesting perception. Tell me more about why you think that. Mm-hmm. And then what we're going to say isn't because we think the data says something else. We're going to say because I worry about the opportunity of my sons. Mm. Okay? So what doesn't work is to react to stuff that we as white men are saying based upon what we're feeling, even though we haven't really owned it. We're saying it, we aren't saying it in an honest way.
And it's not coming across as a feeling.
It's no, because that's how many of us as men of Northern European descent, it's not only us men, but many of us as men of Northern European descent speak in a way that can be very declarative, low affect on our faces, from other people's experience of us devoid of emotion, right? That flat affect. I mean, I'm generalizing here.
Yeah, I got you.
But the way it comes across may mask for other people what's really going on. And this is a really great time to, instead of slapping us with data, which honestly is completely true and needs to be in the conversation. I'm not arguing against the data. Yeah. It's just that there needs to be a degree of savvy about the invitational part of it. It's like, I believe in you enough to hope that what you just said, and this is like in the head, I believe in you enough to hope that what you just said isn't just pure deflection, but it's actually, there's something else going on there. And I want to see, I want to help and find out what it is. So to me, we are like relentlessly invitational with white guys, just saying, come on, we're going to do this. The company says it. The business case says it. The world says it. Your customers say it. Your talent says it. We're doing it. And even if you haven't thought about it this way, the opportunity to be an inclusive leader right now is one of the best opportunities you have ever found in your career. Not all the white guys are going to buy that. And when that's supported, and sometimes it's supported with like loving truth. It's just like, it might be like, if I hear one more white guy say, it's a great time to be a woman, I mean, it might come out a lot of ways, but if it's real and there's care behind it, and it's like, I hear what you're saying, but the impact of what you just said on me is this. Okay, well then that's another way to have the conversation. So to me, it's all about us being clear in ourselves and ready to have the conversation. And that's one of the things I've learned from you, Lawrence, is that to my experience of you, is that you will own your own growth, your own learning. Like you've done a couple of times here already. It says, I know I've got things to learn. And to me, my experience of you is that means that I believe you more when you're more declarative, or when you say something that might be a little different or something I hadn't thought of. So to me, there's a really powerful connection there. And it's not anybody's job to take care of us as white guys, but we do have all the same emotions everyone else has. And we haven't been as conversant with how we show up in this world as white men than we needed to be. I know it's crazy, but it is what it is.
Chuck, on that note, it's interesting you say that. So, I've got, it's even weird for me to say, I got some white guy friends or like some white buddies, because like it's usually said the other way around, right? Like my black friends, right? So some
of my best friends are white guys, Lauren. Right? Yeah, baby. He said it. He thought it.
So here's how I start that conversation. I say, man, it's got to be really tough to be a white guy right now, huh? And like I laugh, they laugh, but they're like, I don't really know how to laugh right now with that.
Right.
But that's
Yeah.
an acknowledgement on my end for me to recognize in them that there is a struggle happening right now
Right. Exactly.
internally, because there's things you have to face that, and it's unprecedented. Like you've never had to face it at this level of rigor, right? And this level of intensity. And so it's kind of a way for me to say, yes, comparatively, it does not match historically, but in the moment,
no equivalencies here, but
right, exactly. But I get it. And so, it definitely opens the door. It definitely opens the door.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing about us being able to get to that place, Lawrence, is that when I describe like the processes of learning that we go through as white men to become more inclusive, understandably, the reaction, even from people who know me well and love me and understand that I'm personally being a different place, but I'm being representative. Part of them, it's like the cartoon bubble just like actually bursts like out of their heads and just going like, wow, that must be so hard for you. Or boo-hoo, wow, life is hard, huh? I mean, that's completely understandable and not necessarily a bad thing to hear. And our challenge is our challenge. Yeah. And honestly, it's on us. What has to work for this to work is that across a visible difference like you and I represent, for people who have Black skin, you get to decide when you get to have that attitude. Yeah. And when you're going to sit back and say, over my dead body, am I going to become useful to you? Because look at the way you're behaving. Right. And on my side, I get to go as many extra miles as I can come up with, because not that I'm spending a lot of time working on white supremacists and white nationalists and the KKK. That's the far crazy end of the cousin tree for me. But there's a whole lot of folks between there and here, right, that are going, well, I'm 50 years old. I've never contemplated this before. I'm in an executive job where everything I do and say is under the microscope, and it's really quite frightening to be watched in my ignorance. And I it's like, again, boo-hoo, you're super well compensated, poor you with your net worth. Right. I understand that. And from inside our experiences, if I generalize, it is what it is. And we got to go through this to get more of us who look like me going. And when we are, it will be another facet of what no one's seen before. I mean, how do you make sense of an executive team that's still got, 9 out of 18 people under white guys, so maybe overrepresented, but 8 of the 9 white guys are like the most inclusive leaders you've ever seen before. Right. What? We don't know what that's going to look like, but we're going to see that.
Right. And I like where you ended there, because the next question really leads to the future and what the future looks like. And I actually want to kind of like break it down a little bit more and have you talk about some of the programs or workshops and stuff you guys do at Great Heart Consulting, yeah, and how that plays into creating a better future.
Well, I mean, like we were saying earlier, I think larger forces than either you or I control are at work in the world, and some of them are malign and some of them are fantastically generative. I want to be on that side. And on the challenging side, I would say one of the things that's the near future, like now, is arriving at, we're going to have to get way better at conflict resolution. The only way we can go through the only way we can be real with each other is to learn how to understand the nature of the conflicts that we're having and have ways to resolve them. Because our conflicts are going to get worse. And we need to have like better conflict. We need to be able to use, all of us know in adult life that in the relationships that stand the test of time, we learn how to resolve conflict, because if we don't, the relationship doesn't last. And when we do, and I see this over and over again in high performing teams, things get broken, things get messy. And when we learn how to resolve conflict together with our differences in view, not despite them, then we have become confident that the next mess we're going to be better at. So conflict resolution, I think, is a core part of where we need to go. I'd say so that's part of the work that we're increasingly doing with individual and in specific conflicts and preparing organizations to think about inclusive conflict resolution. We do a lot of the same, approaches that many consulting companies do with individual advising and workshops and consulting work on strategy, and a lot of peer learning. That I would say a couple of things that we're betting on in our work is the only way you really scale inclusion and equity is to support the learning and clearly expect people to take responsibility for it themselves. And it certainly reflects that invitation to me to take responsibility when I was 13. We're never disappointed when we support learning processes and organizations where teams of people, individual relationships, lines of business, markets, different geographic units around the world. When people see this is about me learning with you, I get to share my learning, I get to learn from your learning, and that's how this works. So the future of this work is going to be very social. It's going to be, the best practices are all going to come out of really efficient storytelling, capturing of what's working, transparency around what's not. Here's the mistakes we made. Here's the conflict we had. After we got the feelings and the facts clearer and a little bit solved for, here's what we're learning from it. So I think what the future is going to look like is the advantages that come to people who can wade into the good stuff and the hard stuff, and build systems, not just interpersonal relationships, but systems where talent really is given the opportunity to rise. That talent is sourced from places we haven't been looking before. When the connection to the people who buy our services and products, it's not just about your employees, it has to be about your customers. To me, that's kind of self-evident, but diversity and equity inclusion is almost always about the employee part of the work. I think the specific part to white guys, much of it we talked about is, to me, it's kind of like a real commitment to tough love. But love is the noun here and tough is the adjective. The love part is I'm going to be with you, even though you make me nuts sometimes. And if you don't want to be with me, then I'm going to move on. That's the tough part. It's like, I'm going to be real with you. I want to invite you and help you be real with me. And then it's human to human with our differences in view, not in spite of, not colorblind, not those fictions. But it's about, like, you and me being able to be ourselves that reflects the things that other people see when they look at you and me. Yeah. But builds on that, enjoys that, is intrigued by that, is mystified by that, and there are things the things that you and I have in common. If there was some way to weigh all the identities, it would be so balanced on Lawrence and Chuck are so much alike, it's shocking. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No one thinks that because they're looking at us going, like, those two people, like, that's weird. They're even in the same meeting, right? Right. But it's the thinking that's skewed. It's not the reality that's skewed. And when we get to be as much of us as we can be, and my white guyness is in it, and maybe it ruins for you, not that this is true for you, but if you're being representational here, sure. Maybe the way I show up ruins for you as a Black man the ability to say, no white people are ever going to come my way. I would love to ruin that for you. I would love to interrupt that experience in your life, because if you're at the place where you're saying, oh, sorry, I know one guy, I know more than one guy who is different than that, then we stop doing the stupid things about our differences, and we start being able to contribute and be what we're made and called to be. And that's what a successful employee relationship looks like. And that's how people will start and keep buying from you if you're selling them something. Right. So the business case part of it, to me, kind of takes care of itself. It's not very mysterious because we actually know what works with humans. Right. And then the serious part along the way is the people who aren't going to have it. Right. I wrote after the 2016 election, I think there's going to be two kinds of white people in the United States. There's going to be the kind that wants a multicultural future and wants to be part of it. and they're and the folks who would prefer for white people to just be in charge. Thank you very much. And after this election, I'm thinking there's three kinds. There's those two kinds, and there's a middle group that's going, I don't know what to make of a multiracial future. I think I want to be part of it, but I'm also worried about giving up advantages. You know, it's that kind of like got a foot in both camps here. And I don't think that's going to be a tenable position to hold day after day, year after year, partly because our own children are saying to us, what? You know, I mean, our kids many of our kids aren't buying it, and our customers aren't buying it, and our employees, if that's how we show up, we'll just go work somewhere else.
Right. And let's be clear on buying it. There's no neutral, right? Like
right.
This idea of, you know, being a non-sexist, non-racist. I mean, you're either are or you're anti, right? And
right, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Things in motion, right? Already.
Yeah. If you think there's a middle ground, then you've pretty much declared.
Right.
Because silence is to be on one side of it and not on the other side of it.
Right. Well, Chuck, I know you've written some books, and for those who are listening and watching, www.greatheartconsulting.com, check them out. And Chuck, you want to name your book for those who would be interested?
Yeah, you don't want to say it out loud, do you, Lawrence? Leadership 101 for White Men: How to Work Successfully with Black Colleagues and Customers. It's the title that, if you're a white guy like me, you may have been known to put its cover down on the airplane. I've had some people say, Chuck, I read your book on the plane, but I put the cover down. So nobody decided I really needed it or something. So what's fun is that I wrote the book in 2008. I should have written it earlier, so it's a little too thick, but it's practical. And what's fascinating is, like, nobody agrees with everything in there. 12 years later, I don't agree with everything in there, but it's still, now it's turning out to be kind of useful, because there are white men going, so how do I do this? And it's like, sorry, but here's 101 essays.
That's a good start, right?
Yeah, it is. It's, any place to start's good.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, it's always laughs and just good thinking and talking and connection. And I appreciate you. And hopefully we'll get to do more of this in the future.
We will, man. Thanks so much for honoring me with the chance to share with you today.
Yep. All right, Chuck. Well, have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.